Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're kind of pushing aside that traditional org chart,
Hmm.
the neat stack of boxes.
Right, the one that tells everyone exactly where they fit.
Exactly. We're stepping into what work actually looks like for a lot of us now. We're doing a deep dive into, well, flatter hierarchies, remote work, these networks, teams, even things like DAOs.
Yeah, these new governance models that are popping up.
It's a world where, honestly, formal authority seems to be fading, and your actual power, your influence, that's what defines the structure now, not your job title.
And that's not just a small tweak, is it? It's pretty fundamental. It really forces us to ask, okay, what happens to leadership when that old command structure, the commander-subordinate thing,
Mm-hmm.
when it just doesn't work anymore, when you can't just tell people what to do and expect compliance. Leadership can't just come from the position. It has to shift.
Shift how?
And its very character, its methods, it's got to be about influence generated from, within the person.
Okay, so that's our mission today then. We're trying to figure out the blueprint for this decentralized leader. We've got a whole stack of sources here, ancient philosophy, military strategy, all the way up to like modern organizational psychology.
Yeah, quite a mix.
We want to find those core principles you need to lead in a system where everyone's kind of expected to be autonomous.
And right away, there's this interesting paradox, isn't there? Traditional authority, that's usually external. It's given to you by the system, right? Your title, your contract.
Sure.
But leading effectively in these flat, networked setups, that has to be internal. It's got to be based on some fundamental principles that actually create real influence that make people want to follow. If your job description doesn't command loyalty.
Then your character has to.
Exactly. You've got to be able to lead yourself first. That's the starting point.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. This core need for self-mastery. If you can't lean on the org chart or your title to get things done,
Yeah, what's left?
the only thing you really have left is the internal integrity, the clarity of the person who's actually asking for something.
That internal anchor, it's everything. And we can actually look to some philosophical ideas for like the ultimate model of that dedicated, purpose-driven person. We're looking for someone who acts with a perfectly controlled mind and intelligence.
Okay.
Someone who gives up that sense of this is mine over possessions or even over the results of what they do. They just act for the bare necessities of the mission.
We see this, don't we, in the Bhagavad Gita? It describes someone who isn't really affected by whether the outcome is good or bad. It's detachment from the outcome, not detachment from the effort.
Precisely. That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
This person, described as a conscious person, they move just like a dedicated part of a bigger machine. Think about your hand. It doesn't move for itself, does it? It moves because the whole body needs it to.
Right.
It's dovetailed with the supreme desire, which for our purposes is the organizational mission. For a decentralized org, this is sort of the ideal psychological state for a contributor. They act without needing personal gain, without anxiety about the results, just for the whole body, the collective.
Okay, but let me push back a bit there. Doesn't that risk creating people who just don't care about results? If you're detached from the outcome, how do you get that urgency, that drive for quality, especially in, a competitive market?
That's a really important point. And the source material kind of reframes detachment to address that. It's not apathy, it's more like insulation from your own ego. When you're detached from the result, you're less likely to fall into those psychological traps, like being afraid to take risks or fighting turf wars or getting totally demoralized if something fails.
Right, you're not taking it personally.
Exactly. You keep your focus on the quality of the action itself because that action is aligned with the bigger mission. That kind of character is just inherently more resilient, more trustworthy, especially in these high-stakes, decentralized environments.
That reframing helps a lot. And this idea of dedicating yourself to the purpose over the ego, it lines up really well with Emerson's view, doesn't it? That transcendentalist idea about spontaneous action.
It does. Emerson argued that real strength only comes in that easy, simple, spontaneous action. And he said, by contenting ourselves with obedience, we become divine.
But obedience there doesn't mean obeying a boss.
Right? No, that's the key. It's obedience not to a person, but to a higher law, that shared purpose. That mission you genuinely believe is right.
Right.
When your own spontaneous actions align with that flow of purpose,
Yeah.
you find this contentment. Emerson even suggests you become the world, the measure of right. Your choices are just so sound, so aligned, they don't need external validation or micromanagement.
So the job of the decentralized leader isn't really enforcing rules then. It's more about articulating that higher purpose so clearly that people just naturally align with it.
That seems to be the idea. If the mission is truly believed in, aligning with it becomes the source of power. It makes the old top-down chain kind of obsolete.
So if you take away the usual enforcement like hierarchy and rules.
And character really does become the currency, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In these distributed networks, maybe asynchronous ones, trust is basically the only glue holding things together. And that trust has to be constantly radiating outwards from people.
Okay, so what are the foundations for that? Cicero had some strong views on ethics, right? He emphasized that nothing can be generous if it isn't also just. That points to a really internal, uncompromising ethical compass.
Absolutely. And Cicero uses this great thought experiment about secret power. He asks us to imagine a man who could, just by, I don't know, snapping his finger.
Like magic.
Sort of like using enchantment or stealth to secretly get his name put into rich people's wills. It's the ultimate secret power, right? No external consequences.
Okay, yeah.
Even if he was absolutely certain nobody would ever find out, Cicero argues a good man wouldn't do it.
Wow. That's a high bar. And it speaks directly to decentralized systems, doesn't it? Where transparency can be limited, either by design or just by distance. Digital tools can make those small transgressions easier, maybe lower consequence.
They can. Cicero's point is that the ethical calculation exists completely independently of reputation or whether you'll get caught. Nothing unjust can ever really be expedient or truly useful in the long run. The source of influence in these systems has to be integrity, not just managing how you look.
And he also pointed out that goodness isn't just one single action, it's more complex. There was that anecdote about the judge, Fimbria.
Right, he was asked to rule on whether some Roman knight was technically a good man.
And he refused.
He refused. He said judging an ordinary person as good was improper because, well, that kind of character is made up of countless duties, innumerable merits. It's the total way someone lives their moral life, not just ticking boxes.
So in a network where you need high trust, fast interactions, often without seeing the person, you're relying entirely on that accumulated sense of their character.
You are, which is why Emerson was so critical of just chasing external fame or wealth. He called those kinds of successes often just poor amends, like a fig leaf trying to cover up the soul's nakedness. Apologies, really, for not achieving a truly good and equal life.
So chasing the title, the big bonus, if it's not rooted in real integrity, it's just a distraction. Or maybe even worse, a cover-up.
Could be. And this brings us right back to that contrast. Covey talks about the character ethic versus the personality ethic. That's so crucial for influence-based leadership.
Because what you are speaks louder than what you say.
Exactly. Emerson nailed it. What you are shouts so loudly in my ears that I cannot hear what you say. In a decentralized org, trust hinges entirely on that constant radiation of who someone really is, not just the image they project.
So if you listening are leading a remote team or maybe contributing to a DAO where it's mostly text, that signal of character, trustworthiness, consistency, alignment, that's really the only currency you have. Your words only land if your integrity is constantly radiating out there, regardless of any external rewards you might be chasing.
Okay, so we've established that the individual leader, or maybe contributor, needs this exceptional self-mastery, this character.
Right, the internal foundation.
Now let's pivot a bit and look at the system itself.
Yeah.
Because to really grasp why decentralization might be necessary or beneficial, we should probably first look at what we're moving away from, the case for centralized power.
The old model.
Yeah.
Hashtag 2.1. Centralized authority as a baseline contract.
And we can start with someone like Hobbes. He argued pretty forcefully that sovereignty, the ultimate power, has to be undivided, whether it's a king or a democracy or an aristocracy.
Doesn't matter which.
Not fundamentally for his argument. The point was it had to be centralized to prevent factions, infighting, and society sliding into, well, civil war. His logic was all about prioritizing that absolute central power for the sake of peace and stability.
Which sounds pretty comforting if you're used to traditional corporate structures, right? Clear lines of command.
It does. But that centralized authority brings its own huge problems, its own instabilities, as someone like Rousseau pointed out.
How so?
Well, Rousseau noted that for a monarchy, a state ruled by one person, to be governed well, its size and complexity really have to match the specific abilities of that one ruler.
Which is a tall order.
A very tall order. And think about it, people aren't constant. But the abilities of a representative body, like a Senate, tend to be more stable over time. Relying on the genius or even just the lifespan of one individual leader, that introduces a massive fragility, especially when organizations get bigger than any one person can realistically handle.
And we see that all the time in business, don't we? Companies built around a single founder or a dominant CEO often struggle or even crumble when that person leaves.
Absolutely. History's full of those examples. So relying too much on the genius at the top creates fragility. And then trying to change that power structure, that's met with fierce resistance. Machiavelli gave us a classic warning there, didn't he? The innovator's peril.
Ah, yes, the innovator's peril. Explain that one.
The danger is basically guaranteed. If you try to introduce a new order, like shifting from centralized command to a more decentralized network, you immediately make enemies of everyone who benefited from the old system.
Okay, that makes sense. They have something to lose.
Right. And crucially, Machiavelli points out, you only have lukewarm defenders among those who might do well under the new system.
Why lukewarm?
Because the opposition is fierce. The incumbents have the existing power, tradition, maybe the rules on their side, the potential beneficiaries. They haven't actually experienced the benefits yet. They're skeptical, maybe unsure.
So trying to bring in agile methods or shift fully remote or adopt something like an internal DAO, you're almost guaranteed to hit major friction inside the company.
You're essentially fighting established structures that are certain about their benefits. Things like stability and control, with potential benefits that are still uncertain, like agility or resilience. It's a huge struggle. And just recognizing that guaranteed resistance is like step one for anyone trying to lead a decentralized shift.
Okay, so if we accept that challenge, we want to move towards distributed governance. How do we stop the whole thing from just falling apart into chaos once you remove that central control? How do you prevent, say, the tyranny of the majority?
Now we get into system design principles. And we can actually go back to the Federalist Papers for some really relevant thinking here. James Madison, especially in Federalist texts, tackled that exact danger you mentioned, the constant threat of a majority faction just trampling the rights of a minority.
And that's absolutely a risk in decentralized settings, isn't it? Whether it's a big company team or a DAO, you get these internal political tribes, factions forming. How do you design against that?
Well, Madison argued that the goal of any good political constitution is really twofold. First, you need to get rulers, or in our case, contributors, who have wisdom and virtue.
Okay, find good people.
Right. But second, and maybe more importantly, you need to take effectual precautions for keeping them virtuous.
Ah, the system needs checks and balances.
Exactly. And in a modern decentralized network, those governing rules, maybe it's the code in a smart contract, maybe it's an immutable policy engine, maybe it's just a clearly agreed upon constitution that becomes the effectual precaution.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. Like, a DAO's smart contract isn't just code, it's acting as a safeguard against a faction taking over, because the rules are enforced by the system, not by the whims of current leaders.
Precisely. The structure itself manages the collective power. And furthermore, for that system to actually work well, it needs knowledge distribution. The Federalist Papers argued this about national taxation, for instance. Central government just can't know all the tiny local details everywhere, the commerce, the needs.
So you need distributed intelligence. The people on the ground, the contributors in the network, they need to be smart enough and empowered enough to share that vital local information sideways and upwards. The network has to be smart everywhere, not just at the top.
Right. And thinking about leadership style in this context, Xenophon's Cyropaedia offers this ancient but really relevant example of leading by consent. Cyrus, after a big victory, he doesn't just order his allies to stick with him.
What does he do instead?
He calls a council. He lays out the situation, the risks, the potential rewards. He basically demonstrates, through shared analysis and clear outcomes, why it's in their best interest to stay together, to share the ongoing danger, and hopefully, the eventual rewards.
So it's leadership by deliberate consent. Loyalty is earned through transparency and showing shared benefits, not just demanded because of rank. But Cyrus also gives a really critical warning, right? About what happens after you achieve success.
Yes, the danger of indolence, of getting complacent. Cyrus warns his followers that maintaining power, maintaining success, actually requires greater diligence, more self-restraint, more self-command than winning it in the first place. Otherwise, they'll just surrender to the sweetness of the day, get lazy.
That's a huge point for decentralized organizations. Complacency is maybe the biggest threat. The struggle to maintain, to keep improving, is continuous, maybe even harder than the initial push to create something new.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If the system stops pushing, stops innovating just because it's successful, it loses its edge. It loses the very thing that made it decentralized and agile in the first place.
Okay, so if the individual needs that strong internal character and the system needs transparent governance, the layer in between, how things actually operate day to day, that's got to be culture, right?
Culture and communication, yeah.
Yeah.
When formal authority is minimized, those become the main ways you get control, alignment, and progress.
And this is where it gets really tricky, I think. How do you encourage people to take necessary risks when there's no clear command chain to, like, absorb the blame if things go wrong? Hashtag 3.1, building a culture that expects and handles failure.
For this, we can look at creative fields, especially the Pixar model described in Creativity, Inc. They came to realize that management's job isn't actually to prevent people from taking risks.
No, what is it then?
It's to build the organization's ability to recover when those risks inevitably lead to failure sometimes.
That's a big shift in thinking. And they learned this the hard way, didn't they? There was that terrifying incident during Toy Story 2 production.
Yeah, it was truly harrowing. The pressure was unbelievable, people working 7-day weeks. And one artist, completely exhausted, forgot their infant child in the back seat of their car in a hot parking lot.
Oh my God. Was the baby okay?
Thankfully, yes, the baby was found and was safe. But that incident was just this incredibly clear, traumatic signal to everyone.
A signal that what?
That the system was fundamentally broken. It was running on unsustainable ambition, asking far too much of people, even people who wanted to give it. For a decentralized leader, especially managing remote teams where you can't see the strain.
Right, you don't see the burnout happening.
Exactly. So you have to be hyper-aware of those risks and build in systemic protections against overwork. Vigilance isn't just about the project's deadline. It's about the human sustainability of the people doing the work.
And kind of flipping that coin, a healthy culture doesn't just tolerate problems, it actually starts to welcome them as signs of progress. You mentioned that amazing story about the Toy Story 3 crew.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. They were genuinely offended when someone told them, sort of congratulating them, that they weren't having any major crises during the making of the film.
They were offended by not having problems.
Yes, because they interpreted that lack of crisis as meaning they weren't pushing hard enough, they weren't trying to invent something truly new and original. A really creative, healthy culture starts to recognize that the signs of invention, dealing with genuine originality, they almost always come with these incredibly recalcitrant, really tough problems.
Look, everything's running perfectly smoothly.
You're probably not innovating. You're probably just doing what you already know how to do.
Wow. That's the ultimate mindset shift, isn't it? Failure isn't a black mark. It's just the unavoidable cost of trying something new. So the decentralized leader has to operate assuming good intentions and then give people the responsibility and the resources to fix the mistakes that are bound to happen if they're really stretching themselves. Hashtag 3.2. Radical candor and the problem of safety.
Okay, so you need that safety to fail. But in a flat structure, psychological safety is critical for another reason: speaking up. Giving difficult feedback feels really high stakes when there's no clear hierarchy to sort of diffuse the accountability.
Right, it feels more personal.
Exactly. So the leader has to work really hard to make sure those crucial, difficult conversations actually happen. They don't just get swept under the rug.
And there are tools for this, right? Like priming the pump from crucial conversations.
Yeah, that's a great technique. When someone goes silent, maybe they feel unsafe, maybe they're just shutting down you. As the leader, have to kind of step in and offer your best guess about what they might be thinking or feeling. You put some meaning into the conversation first.
You make the first move.
Right, hoping they'll feel safe enough to respond and share what's really going on. It opens the door.
Because the alternative is just silence, which can kill a project or an organization. We saw that example at Disney Animation after the Pixar merger, didn't we? With the film American Dog.
Oh, that's a classic cautionary tale. The Story Trust. This group of experienced directors, they watched a screening, and apparently the plot had just gone completely off the rails into absurdity.
Okay.
But nobody really spoke up with candid feedback.
Why not? These are experienced people.
Because the leader, John Lasseter at the time, had apparently started the meeting with some positive comments. And the directors were afraid to contradict him, afraid to seem like they were attacking something he liked, or maybe hurting the feelings of the film's director.
So the project was basically dying in silence because people were afraid to be honest.
Pretty much. They were paralyzed by that fear, the risk of criticizing a project that leadership might be invested in. The crucial lesson there, for any leader, especially in a flatter structure, is you have to explicitly build the culture where people understand we aren't attacking the person, we're attacking the project. Without that clear separation and safety, you just won't get the tough feedback you need.
And when you give feedback, the sources really stress the how. You have to avoid what Kim Scott calls ruinous empathy.
Ah, yes, ruinous empathy. That's when you're trying so hard to be nice to someone's face that you fail to give them the clear, maybe painful feedback they actually need to hear to improve.
It feels kind, but it's ultimately damaging.
Totally damaging. The guidance, the feedback has to be, well, almost excruciatingly detailed sometimes. The leader needs to show, not tell. Use specific examples. Don't just retreat into vague abstractions.
Why is abstraction bad? It seems safer sometimes.
It feels safer because the specifics can be awkward or feel harsh. But abstraction unintentionally signals to the person receiving the feedback that their behavior or the problem was maybe too shameful to even discuss openly. Specific examples make it concrete, actionable. It's about the behavior, not about them being fundamentally flawed. Hashtag 3.3. Empathy, shame, and trust.
Okay, so you need radical candor, but that candor has to be built on a foundation of empathy, right? That seems essential for it not to just become brutal honesty.
Absolutely. Brené Brown really emphasizes this. Empathy is core, especially when you're dealing with the vulnerability that comes out when people receive tough feedback or face setbacks.
How does empathy help specifically?
Well, Brown says that when someone's feeling shame, maybe after a mistake or critical feedback, if they can share that story with someone who responds with genuine empathy, then shame can't survive.
So empathy is like the antidote to shame.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be complex. Simple, authentic phrases work best. Things like, oh man, I feel you, or I know that feeling and it sucks, or just me too. That shared vulnerability, that connection, creates the safety needed for the person to actually process the feedback, recover, and adjust.
But showing that empathy, especially when maybe you're frustrated yourself, requires real internal strength. And part of that is avoiding the trap Stephen Covey described, imposing your own view, using the wrong map.
That's right. The map is your own experience, your autobiography, your solutions that worked for you. When there's already tension or conflict, trying to jump straight to teaching or giving advice often just lands as judgment.
Like, you should do it my way.
Precisely. It can feel like rejection or disrespect. The core issue isn't just about finding the right technique, it's a whole paradigm shift. You have to genuinely seek to understand the other person's reality, their map, their perspective, before you start layering your own advice onto their situation.
So, practically speaking, day to day, coaching a decentralized team, how do we stop ourselves from just jumping in with solutions? That advice monster tendency is strong.
It is. One powerful tool is strategic questioning, especially questions that raise what Michael Bungay-Stanier calls the Terra quotient. Terra stands for tribe, expectation, rank, and autonomy. These are key drivers of how people feel and react in social situations, like work.
Okay, TEAR. Tribe, expectation, rank, autonomy. How does questioning raise that?
Well, instead of giving the answer, which implicitly lowers the other person's sense of rank and autonomy.
Because you're the one with the solution.
Right. You ask questions that put the focus back on them. Questions like, what's the real challenge here for you, do you think, that honors their competence, their rank? Or asking, and what do you want? In just a sentence or two, what's the outcome you're looking for? That boosts their sense of autonomy, focusing them on their own goals.
So simple questions shift the dynamic from advice giving to insight generation.
Exactly. And that empowers people in a decentralized way. They lead their own problem solving, which is the whole point of moving away from hierarchy in the first place.
All right, so we've covered the individual leader's character, the design of the governing system, and the importance of culture and feedback. Now we need to talk about actually getting things done, execution.
Right, the pointy end.
In a system without that top-down command structure, how do you make sure all these autonomous people or teams are actually aligned? How do you get them all pulling in the same direction with some kind of coordinated speed? Hashtag tag 4.1, alignment via shared goals, OKRs.
Well, when you can't rely on commands, you need something else. You need radical, transparent alignment. And that's where frameworks like OKRs, objectives, and key results become really central for distributed work.
OKRs. So the idea is to define what success looks like really clearly across the whole organization.
Yeah, so everyone understands how their specific work, their local efforts, contribute to the bigger global mission. Clarity on goals is just paramount. Objectives need to be clear, qualitative, inspiring, and the key results. Those have to be measurable, specific things that actually drive behavior.
Makes sense. But implementing OKRs isn't always smooth sailing, is it?
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
It seems straightforward, but it's easy to mess up. A common early mistake is leaders setting goals for people, instead of working collaboratively to match people to goals that align with their skills and maybe even their interests.
What happens then?
You end up with objectives that are maybe too narrow, disconnected from the high-level strategy, or they're just too vague, too nebulous to actually guide concrete work. The goal-setting process itself needs to be pretty decentralized and thoughtful to work well.
And what about encouraging risk-taking, that innovation piece we talked about? How do OKRs fit with that? You need people to aim high.
That's where the idea of stretch goals or stretch for amazing goals comes in. These are aspirational OKRs, goals that are deliberately set beyond what seems currently achievable. Maybe you only expect to hit 70% completion.
Why do that? Doesn't it set people up for failure?
The psychological intent behind it is key. You have to create an environment where people feel free to try for something amazing and fail without judgment, as long as they gave it their all. Setting these ambitious goals is meant to stimulate creative thinking, push people beyond their comfort zone.
But there's a balance, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can't set the bar so ridiculously high that success is obviously impossible from the start. That just kills morale instantly. People won't even try. It's about encouraging that maximum accountable effort towards something inspiring, not guaranteeing they'll hit an unrealistic target.
Okay, so OKRs provide alignment. But what about operating in environments that are just inherently messy, fluid, constantly changing, like a volatile market or a big technological shift? Can we learn anything from other fields there?
Definitely. Military strategy, especially concepts from what's sometimes called small war or irregular warfare, offer some really direct, actionable parallels for navigating decentralized, complex situations.
Like what?
We can look at Sun Tzu. He talked about how fighting with a big army or a small one is fundamentally the same if you rely on good communication signs and signals, and really importantly, if you mix direct and indirect maneuvers. He called them Qin and CHI.
Okay, Cheng and CHI. How do we translate that for, say, a business leader in a decentralized company?
So Qing, the direct maneuver, that's like your core business, your established product line, the predictable iteration. It's what everyone expects you to do.
Okay.
CHI, the indirect maneuver, that's the surprise element. It could be your disruptive R&D project, an unexpected move into a new market, maybe a secret partnership nobody saw coming. The strategic genius, according to Sun Tzu, lies in mixing these up effectively to confuse your competition.
So they don't know where you're really focusing your effort.
Exactly. You make them guess, maybe overcommit resources, defending against the wrong thing. In a decentralized setup, this could mean your core teams, CCRH, execute reliably on the known stuff, while you have other, maybe smaller, autonomous teams, CHA, tasked with creating operational surprises, exploring new frontiers. The leader's job is to orchestrate that mix, which gives the whole network resilience.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about when things go wrong? When a decentralized team or project gets metaphorically overrun?
Well, Clausewitz, writing about People's War, offers some guidance there. He argued for using strategic defense, defending the overall mission, but rarely using tactical defense, meaning digging in at one spot.
So don't just try to hold one position if you're overwhelmed.
Right. He said if a fighting unit gets overrun, it shouldn't try to concentrate and make a last stand that just invites being surrounded and destroyed. Instead, it should immediately disperse, scatter, and continue the defense through fluid, surprise attacks from unexpected directions.
That's a really potent metaphor for organizational resilience, isn't it? Anti-fragility. Instead of doubling down on one failing central point, the distributed parts need to stay fluid, keep moving, keep surprising the competition to stay viable.
Absolutely. But all this fluidity, all this decentralized action, it's complicated by what Clausewitz famously called the fog of war. And as the book Extreme Ownership highlights, this applies just as much to chaotic business environments. Things are confusing, fast-moving. Even situations that seem obvious in hindsight are murky in the moment.
So what does that demand from the leaders on the ground, the team leads?
It demands that they have the ability and the authority to prioritize and execute independently, right there in the middle of the complexity, even without perfect orders from the top. If things are moving too fast for central command, their autonomous decision-making, their ability to cut through the fog and act, that's the ultimate test of effective decentralized leadership.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive really paints a picture, doesn't it? The decentralized leader, it seems, has to be this master of internal character, a really vigilant shaper of a resilient culture, and an orchestrator of clear, influence-driven communication, all to get coordinated action without falling back on simple commands.
Yeah, the old levers of authority, position power, They're just not enough anymore. We're really seeing this profound shift away from power that comes just from your spot in the hierarchy. It's moving beyond even those older dynamics. Like, remember how specialists, the staff people, gained power because their knowledge was essential?
Right, knowledge is power.
That power was still kind of conditional, tied to their function.
Yeah.
The new leader's power, this influence-based power, it feels more unconditional. It has to come purely from their genuine worth, their principles, how they show up.
So what does all this mean for you listening to this, maybe operating in this flatter, more networked world? I guess the ultimate measure of your effectiveness isn't going to be your title or how big your team or budget is.
No.
It's going to be about the voluntary loyalty, the efficacy, the results you inspire just through who you are, your character, and your unwavering commitment to that shared purpose.
Yeah, and this whole move towards decentralization, it really forces every single one of us, leader or contributor, to confront a pretty fundamental question. If you couldn't rely on your job title, if you couldn't threaten to fire someone, if you had no mandated authority at all, would anyone still choose to follow your lead?
That's a tough question.
It is. And maybe one more provocative thought, building on that need for vigilance we saw with Cyrus and the Pixar team. Imagine your current efforts led to absolute, complete, pain-free success. No more struggle required. Would that feel like victory? Or would you actually be a bit terrified by the complacency, the indolence that might set in? Would you recognize that maybe the struggle itself, welcoming those incredibly recalcitrant problems, is actually the real engine, the thing that keeps the invention, the progress alive? Maybe the health of your network isn't measured by its lack of problems, but by its readiness to embrace the next big difficulty.